My name is Lutz. I work for Empirica, which is an independent research organization based in Bonn in Germany. And over the last 20 years or so, I have been working with many communities on, let's say, exploring digital technologies for the development of new services in the public domain, mainly health services, public participation, and different things. And I'm part of the project team, and I support the team, especially in relation to this knowledge cluster here, which is on e-services. Well, thanks a lot. So, Anita, are you going to share the presentation? Then I continue with my part now. So what is this digital service cluster all about? So, the number 7, yeah, all about. So in a nutshell, the idea is that we are going to jointly to explore opportunities generally provided by digital technologies for addressing specifically issues faced or challenges faced by rural communities. And there's possibly no doubt that digital technologies will impact on our life more and more. But sometimes, especially when it comes to exploiting digital technologies for, let's say, rural communities. So my impression has been in the past that it's sometimes not that easy to, let's say, discern hype from reality. So, of course, there are many good examples that can be found how digital technologies can be used in a rural context. But what we have learned from the Smart Rural 21 project, but also from other projects, it's not as simple as it might look at in first case. Of course, technology can help, but it's usually not the technology in itself that delivers an added value or specifically, let's say, a value in a tangible manner. Very often you need to do both. You need to introduce new technologies, but at the same time, to do quite a lot of non-technological innovation when it comes to the way how people cooperate, when it comes to the way different, let's say, stakeholders are to be brought together and all these kind of things. And we're going to hear two, I think, very good examples how this has been managed later on. But before we go on, I would just to give you a very brief overview of the cluster. As we all know, there is no such thing than an average village. So villages are very diverse in terms of in many regards, and the solutions that may make sense in a specific context may differ a lot. In relation to these context situations. So could you click on the next slide, please? So therefore, just very briefly, what type of villages are represented in our cluster here? As you can see here on this slide, we have received 25 applications plus the 2 lighthouse villages we are going to hear about later on. So, but these are not included in the analysis. And as you can see from the slide, we have quite a good coverage across different, let's say, countries, at least with 1 represented villages here. Next slide, please. Don't want to lose too much time on that. But also when it comes to the size of the village, I think we have quite a good spread across different, let's say, sizes and different types of villages. We have quite a number of rather small villages, but we have at the same time also larger, let's say, communities with even above 10,000 people. So here as well, I think we have represented in the cluster quite a good mix of different context situations when it comes to the number of people, not only to be served by a certain technology, but also when it comes to the, let's say, number of people who can potentially become involved in trying out new things, in developing new services with help of technology and so forth. Next slide, please. Also, when it comes to more geographic or socio-geographic characteristic, from my point of view, I would say we have quite a good mix of different, let's say, types of villages in the cluster. About, let's say, 1/3, very roughly 1/3, have described themselves as villages in a very mountainous area. Others have described them according to other characteristics, for instance, situated at the coast, even an island in a border situation, or very remotely. And about another roughly 1/3 have no specific geographic characteristics that were mentioned. But apart from this, some mentioned other structural characteristics, such as, let's say, their situations pretty much characterized as a satellite of a big city nearby, or by a kind of intangible cultural heritage, which is very specific to their situation and so on. But here again, quite a number of different structural characteristics covered in this cluster, I would say. Next slide, please. Also, when it comes to the different stakeholders that may have a role to play when it comes to exploring digital technologies for the sake of the local community, as we all know, there can be quite different situations. And this is also reflected by the types of organizations representing a village in this cluster. So we have quite a number of representatives which are from the municipality or from the local administration, so the public administration representatives. But we have also an equally large part of representatives which could be, let's say, assigned to the non-government organization, civil society, which are not necessarily part of the public administration or, let's say, the political umbrella in the local community. And we have even some very specific participants like private institutes, cooperatives, or I think even a museum. So next slide, please. Also, when it comes to the motivation that was stated in the application forms, why the village representatives wanted to take part in this activity here, I think there are quite different situations which we can observe. So the main motivation, as we can see on the left side, that was mentioned, was a general exchange of good practice with no specific expectations or no specific, let's say, type of area to be focused on, or specific project or approach which would be interested by the villages. But at the same time, we had even a few who have started to, let's say, do something already, and who, let's say, decided to participate in this cluster with respect to a very specific project idea or very specific approach for local development. But these are rather the minority. So the most expectations were rather to learn from others and also provide some experiences to others in a more generic manner. And when it comes to, let's say, embedding the local activities within a more wider strategy or development plan, roughly 2/3 have a formalized strategy or development plan or a vision document in place already. So these activities are then, let's say, to be incorporated into a let's say, more medium-term strategy or perspective. While about very roughly 1/3 said that no such a strategy or vision has yet been put in place in relation to local development, where the digital component could find its place in. Okay, next slide, please. And then this slide tries to summary, let's say, the key challenges and aspects mentioned in the application forms. And this is very, very much condensed. So there were quite interesting texts provided in the application forms. Very roughly, it's perhaps fair to let's say summarize three different types of challenges that are faced by the participating villages. So quite often socio-demographic challenges were mentioned. For instance, the depopulation, young people move away and so forth, and also population aging, which may result in an increased demand for support services, health services, but also support of daily activities of daily life and so forth. So the socio-demographic challenge seems to impact quite a number of the villages which are represented. Then other aspects that were mentioned relate to what could perhaps be termed economic challenges. So here, for instance, lack of employment possibilities were mentioned in a number of application forms, and also related to this, the need for commuting outside the village, sometimes even quite far. And a third, let's say, block of challenges could be summarized under the heading of quality of life-related challenges. Here, quite a number of things were mentioned in the application forms, such as, for instance, lacking access to public services, which are more and more on decline. It's difficult to keep the level of service up. With declining population and so forth, for instance, in the field of health and education. In reality, of course, these different aspects may be interconnected quite a bit, but for the purposes here of structuring, let's say, the type of issues that came up from the application forms, it's possibly fair to distinct these three core blocks, if you so want. And related to the challenges, quite a number of specific goals were mentioned in the applications forms. Why do we participate in this cluster? So, and why do we want to utilize digital services, or why we hope to be able to utilize digital services to addressing some of these challenges faced? So these reflect quite a bit the challenges that were mentioned. It was explicitly mentioned quite several times, for instance, that digital services are expected or hoped to contribute to making the own village attractive as a place to live for others, perhaps to keep young families there, or even attract new people. Then there was also an expectation that, let's say, it's important to enable the local population to make use of digital media for their own purposes. This can be, in particular, mainstream digital media. We all already use Facebook, messaging service or so. This does not necessarily relate to specific digital solutions addressing a specific problem, such as e-health solutions also. Another aspect that was mentioned is that it's hoped to use digital services to attract remote workers. So either the population already living there, or even people who want to work for a certain period of time in a local area or in a rural area, for instance, during holidays and these kind of things. Also, the more social side was mentioned. So digital technologies are hoped to help strengthening the sense of belonging and mutual support in the village. We have heard already the idea of a village where people support each other's, amongst others, also with help of digital technologies. And I think Hans Werner will tell us more later about this, how they approach this in Ovenhausen. Maintenance access of public services that on decline, I already mentioned. Care for older people, already mentioned as well. Generally, it was mentioned, development of tourism might be supported with help of digital technologies. Also things like providing opportunities for selling local food, and even development of an energy community, which might be which seems to correspond with the other knowledge cluster we have already set up. So that's perhaps sufficient for now. Next slide, please. When it comes to provide you with a brief overview, what different types of villages are represented in the cluster, and what types of issues have been mentioned so far, we should possibly address and deal with in throughout the cluster work.